Hello and welcome to the Rugby Gods podcast. I'm John Keenan. No mai haere mai. Today is July 13th and now let's talk some rugby. Okay, so a bit of a bellwether. We've gotten to halfway through Super Rugby Aotearoa, 5 rounds completed, which means that every New Zealand team has played every other New Zealand team, and it means that every New Zealand team has had a bye. So basically, it's a 10-week competition. We've had 5 weeks. We're halfway through it. Everybody's played 4 and had a bye, and we can really have a bit of a look at like where the teams are or how they're faring. Maybe before we go into the 2 New Zealand matches from the weekend, I think I'll just have a quick look through the actual 4 games, tell you the scores, and then tell you what my margin was for the games as well, because I made predictions. I play a little bit of fantasy rugby at a website called superbrew.com, and I've got 3 or 4 pools that I play in there. So basically that kind of keeps me a little bit honest, makes me follow the games just like this podcast, and basically I have to put my money where my mouth is, right? So let's get into that. Let's have a look at round 5. So the way that I'm basically doing things at the moment is that I'm doing a preview show generally on a Friday, and then I'm doing like a review, which I'm calling a wrap-up show, usually on a Monday and or Tuesday, following the games from the weekend. So please go have a bit of a look back through maybe the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, I guess 4 or 5 weeks now, and you should be able to find round 1 preview, round 1 wrap-up, etc., all the way through the last 5 weeks. I'm also occasionally just doing podcasts that are a bit more, as I would say, esoteric, just coming straight out of my head, straight out of my rugby thinking, and they may be interesting to you. They may just be like really abstract, I don't know, but maybe check out a playlist I have called Blue Sky Thinking, which is obviously blue sky thinking, big ideas around rugby, what should be or what could be perhaps. So doing a little bit of that as well, but mostly just trying to get 2 podcasts out a week, one on a Friday before the games, and then one on a Monday, Tuesday to review the games. So this is obviously the wrap-up and or review show after the games from round 5, which happened July 10th to July 12th. And like I said before, it's now July 13th when I do this. So, first game was on the Friday. It was the Rebels at home to the Reds, although it was actually at a neutral venue. It was played in Sydney. It was played in Manly, North Sydney, essentially. So the score there was Rebels 18, Reds 18. So there was a draw. And also Super Rugby AU, Super Rugby Aotearoa, the New Zealand conference. They're both playing slightly different rules. So it was quite interesting to see some of those rules come into play. The Super Rugby AU has basically like a golden point rule. I think I can't remember exactly what they were calling it. They were calling it like, no, actually I can't remember at all, but they used the name super inside of it, right? So it was like a super play or a super time or something like that. Essentially it meant that, if it was drawn at 80 minutes, there was going to be 5 minutes each way. First team to score basically won the game, right, in extra time or like super time. As it turned out, they played 5 minutes each way and nobody scored any more points. So the 18-all draw from 80 minutes became that 18-all draw after 85, after 90 minutes, and it was officially a draw. So a little bit of an anticlimax, I guess, for sort of like rugby in general, I guess, but or like Sansa/Super Rugby in general, because it was the first time that a draw had actually been extended into what I would consider, what I usually I think the normal parlance is golden point. So it was sort of the first time that golden point was used, and it just didn't work out. It just remained 18-all draw. So there you go, draw at 80 minutes, draw at end of golden point. 18-all, I had the Reds by 12, so I was well and truly off there. Although to be fair, the Reds were actually down by 10 going into the last sort of 10 minutes of that match. I thought they were completely toast. a little bit of credit, I guess, to the Reds for actually getting back into that and drawing it eventually. But gee, they looked well off the pace. I was pretty disappointed in that Reds team. And I think, if you've watched any of my, if you'd watched my preview, or if you've watched any of my content covering sort of Super Rugby Australian teams, I think you know that I'm actually like a really big fan of the Reds this year. I think they've got a good team, a good coach, etc., and players in the right places to really be effective. So yeah, very disappointing for me to see them draw and really probably deserve to lose, to that Rebels team at a neutral venue. So yeah, they've got a few issues. I guess the bonus for them is that they get to go home round 3, and I believe they're playing the Force at home, round 3. So that's a fairly easy, you would think, winnable or winnable-ish kind of game for the Reds. To keep going in the comp, they do have a win and a draw, but I think they're some way off the pace of the Brumbies, who had the bye this week in the Australian competition. If we have a look, like I just said, Reds by 12, that was my pick, so I had Reds 12 plus. The Super Brew community had that 40% Rebels, 60% Reds. So yeah, I kind of went on the favoured pick there. Not a huge favoured pick, but it was the favoured pick. 18-all draw, a huge upset, or a very underrated pick, obviously. So that was first game, Rebels Reds. Don't think it really lived up to too much, to be honest, unfortunately. If we continue on to the Saturday games, so there was the Saturday night Trans-Tasman doubleheader. Starts in New Zealand and then continues on over in Australia. So first game of the doubleheader was the Crusaders at home to the Blues, which was clearly match of the round, basically match of the competition so far. Certainly in terms of Super Rugby Aotearoa. Both teams came in with 3 wins, 3-0 records, so 3 wins, no losses, beating every other team. And then, the Crusaders at home, that was always going to be, I think, fairly significant. And the score was 26-15 to the Crusaders. So, Crusaders winning that one by 11. I picked the Crusaders by 13. So, pretty close, fairly useful for the margin there. If we have a look at the Super Brew community, the Super Brew community being in this particular iteration of Super Rugby, it's about 53,000. So yeah, there's 53,000 people playing Super Brew. Essentially, it's a merging of of Super Rugby Aotearoa and Super Rugby AU. So they're calling it Super Rugby Restart, which is just completely fictitious name. But it serves the purpose of what they're doing here. There's roughly sort of 55,000 people playing. So when I talk about the Super Brew community, that's what I mean. So yeah, having a look at the Super Brew community, it was 84% picked the Crusaders, 16% picked the Blues. A little bit surprised about that. I mean, you would certainly think that on the whole, it's smart money to back the Crusaders for one. And for 2, it's definitely smart money to back the Crusaders in Christchurch, where they have an insane win record now, sort of 30 plus games I believe since they were defeated there. I would have thought people would have got on the Blues train a little bit more than just 16%. I would have thought that would be more like a 70-30 kind of game. And the Blues looked really good in the first half, even through to sort of 55 minutes. And then when they got that Rico Ioane try, they really sort of just shook up the hornet's nest. I mean, you could feel it, right? I mean, Eno charging down or Teddy Black's conversion. I mean, that doesn't happen very often, especially not from close range inside the 15s. It's pretty rare that a kicker gets charged down like that. So yeah, you could see that, and then Moanga was extremely cheeky from the kickoff there. A cheeky little 10-meter, chip and chase grubber, and then regathered, ran straight deep into Blues territory, and it was all on. And yeah, that last 20-25 minutes, the Crusaders came home really hard and looked a quality team. They really did look, again, unfortunately, you'd have to say, if you're not a Crusaders fan and you're up for basically maybe more of a even sort of split of New Zealand rugby talent. Unfortunately, you'd have to say again, Crusaders are a step above everybody. Probably 2 steps above basically everybody, 1 step above the Blues, but certainly a step above in New Zealand rugby at present for kind of like the 4th year in a row by the looks of things. It's going to be pretty tough for the Blues and or possibly the Hurricanes, to peg them back for the remaining 5 rounds of this competition. That's for sure. So yeah, I mean that was the Crusaders Blues. It was a good game. Test match intensity. It's often thrown around as a bit of a cliche. When you're talking about fairly high level sort of club games, people will chuck that call out there. But I actually think that was a pretty legitimate call. I watched that game, live at a pub with a friend, and it was a good atmosphere there, and it really did feel like like an All Blacks Australia game, or like a pretty good level, pretty high level, sort of test match. So yeah, that was my thoughts. Third game of the weekend, second part of that Trans-Tasman doubleheader, the way that it works, was the Waratahs at home to the Western Force. So yeah, the return of the Force after like 3 years. How they're going to go, or how were they going to go? Well, I mean, you'd have to say they did pretty damn well. They did get themselves up 14-0 at one stage before the Waratahs struck back late in the first half, and then just really dominated the back half of the game. The second half was pretty much all Waratahs, especially that last sort of 20-25 minutes. Well done to the Force. They certainly looked good, really good in that first half, and took a lead to half time. But that 55-60 minute mark, you got to say, like, a little bit surprised on the conditioning or something of the team. They definitely look pretty gassed at sort of 60 minutes, and I would have thought, you can't train quality, you can't train talent as such. You can only really buy it, right? Or like foster it from from a deep level. But you can't get a team together in 2 months and train talent, but you can train like energy, or you can train fitness. I mean, it's almost all you can really train, right? So I was a little bit surprised to see the Force had been given the heads up nod 6 to 8 weeks ago that you're going to be playing in this competition, They have picked up some signings, some pretty peripheral, not particularly huge, but Australian/international signings. Most of them weren't playing and or on the bench. So I think this Force team will get a bit stronger. There is definitely a little bit more to give than what they started with against the Waratahs. But it's a real concern to that conditioning. It seems significant to me that the Waratahs were just better, like physically better, in that last sort of 20 minutes. I'm not deep diving into the Waratahs Force stats in terms of tackle counts and things like that, but I would say it must have been pretty insanely lopsided to the Waratahs. That's just going to be my guess. Certainly, it's where the game mattered, which was essentially when the game got close. There's 20-25 to go. The Waratahs just rolled over the top of them. So good to see the Force, come out and have a really good first half. But it's a little bit of a shades of the Sunwolves kind of thing going on there. It's kind of like the Sunwolves could be plucky for 40 minutes or 50 minutes, but certainly, Super Rugby plural, but even Super Rugby AU really doesn't need another sort of 40-minute, 50-minute team. They need a legit team. So hopefully the Force can get a little bit more match fitness into them. Could be a pretty tough first 2 weeks. Obviously, week 1 in Sydney, and then week 2, I believe they're pushing up to Queensland and Brisbane and the Reds. So could be a couple of pretty tough first 2 weeks for them. Well, bye was first week, and then 2 weeks on the road. So I guess round 2 and 3 for them. But then obviously they're going to get some home games, and hopefully they'll have a bit more match fitness, a little bit more match nous, a little bit more smart about them, like game smarts about them, and hopefully they can really have a good crack at the Rebels for sure. Maybe the Brumbies might give them a little bit more of a reality check, I believe. But yeah, like they really should be targeting that home game against the Rebels that I'm assuming they're going to have either in round 4 or round 5, I assume, if we're thinking about the Super Rugby in an AU context. If I just click through, so they've got the Reds away for round 6, which is really round 3 in Australia. And then they've got to be at home here somewhere. Oh yeah, they've got the Brumbies, I guess round 4. And then around 5 in the Australian competition, they will be at home to the Rebels on a Friday night. So yeah, Friday, 31st of July, it'll be their second home game. They'll be taking on the Rebels on a Friday night. I think they've really got to target that one and, look to win that. That would just be my pick, or, what I'm thinking for them. But yeah, so, good luck to the Force. Hopefully they keep teams, fairly honest. But yeah, got to work on that fitness, I think. Got to work on that for sure. So yeah, 23-14 to the Waratahs. Sorry, I'm not even sure if I mentioned the scores. 23-14 to the Waratahs. Waratahs won by 9. I had the Waratahs by 15. So yeah, and then final game of the round, or fourth game of the round, second New Zealand game, was the Hurricanes at home to the Highlanders on the Sunday. And it was 17-11 to the Hurricanes. So Hurricanes won by 6. I had the Hurricanes to win by 4. So, did fairly reasonable with my picks. I picked the Crusaders, I picked the Hurricanes, and I had 13 plus for the Crusaders, they won by 11, and then I had 4 plus, for the Hurricanes, and they won by 6. So I was pretty close on those, which is good. Maybe I should just quickly go back to that Waratahs Force game. The community, the Super Brew community of 55,000, they had that 88% picked to the Waratahs v 12% Force. I'm actually almost kind of surprised that 12% would pick the Force. I think that's kind of high, considering it was their first game back in the competition against Super Rugby teams in 3 years, and then obviously first game together as an actual unit. So quite surprised to see that even 12% pick that, but an 88%, pretty much favoured pick there. If we go down to the Hurricanes Highlanders, 87% of the community, Super Rugby community, picked the Hurricanes. 13% picked the Highlanders. Pretty surprised about that. You're essentially saying, if you have a look through the Crusaders, 84% picked the Crusaders, 88% picked the Waratahs, and 87% picked the Hurricanes. The 3 home teams, and those 3 teams did win, but I really would have thought you might have got more like 30% picking the Blues, maybe more like 25% picking the Highlanders, and maybe sub 10% picking the Force. That's just kind of what I would have thought. But hey, maybe the Super Rugby community is pretty smart, right? Or in terms of rugby knowledge, because those three smart picks, or those 3 favoured picks, they did duly win. So and that is what I picked as well. But yeah, a little bit surprised to see how much or how little people were getting on, say, the Blues train, or the new Force team, or even the Highlanders up in Wellington. So that's that. In terms of going through, maybe I'll just really quickly recap that one time. It was a bit of a shocker from me. So this might be a little bit better. So how did I go? Correct outcomes. I picked 3 out of 4. The community in general picked 2.59 out of 4. Let's have a look one more time. So the Rebels 18, Reds 18. The community expectation was 1%. So I would say probably sub 1%, but 1% picked that draw. Crusaders 26, Blues 15, 84% picked that. Waratahs 23, Force 14, 88% picked that. And the Hurricanes 17, Highlanders 11, 87% picked that. So 3 pretty big favoured picks there, and a left field draw. So moving on. Just to kind of try and deep dive a little bit into, am I going there 19 minutes? So yeah, try and deep dive through quite quickly the 2 New Zealand, or the 2 Super Rugby Aotearoa games. Just have a quick squiz through some of the metrics basically, and sort of see if I can maybe justify what happened based on data, and or leave myself scratching my head as to maybe the scores should have been tighter, or should have been a larger, or a bigger margin. So let's go through some of the match stats. We'll start with the Crusaders. v Blues from Christchurch. So yeah, 26-15 to the Crusaders. So 2 tries apiece. It was pretty dour. They basically played in fridge-like conditions, like it was somewhere around 5 degrees, and it was dry. It was a dry night, but obviously it's in the middle of New Zealand winter, so it was pretty dewy by the time a 7 o'clock kickoff came around, and that certainly that certainly helped or hindered, I guess, a free-flowing game. It certainly helped the error rate. And if you have a look at the fullbacks, I think Havili and Bowden Barrett both committed quite a high number of turnover conceded stats or issues there at the back as fullbacks. So yeah, it was a bit slippery, a bit greasy, I guess you would say. Even though the actual conditions were really good overhead. So yeah, it sort of affected the run meters. So the Crusaders ran for 250 meters and the Blues ran for 201. So usually that would sort of suggest to me pretty underwhelming game, like a lot of kicking, perhaps too much kicking maybe, which could well be argued, I guess. But yeah, because for me, a relatively dry track, good conditions, I think no really big favourable winds. I would be expecting sort of 400 meters per team is a pretty good stat, to keep things interesting, keep things, good running rugby. But I was actually pretty interested and pretty entertained. It was just a different kind of game, very much, test match footy, as has been mentioned. So yeah, a little bit underpowered in terms of run meters, but I still enjoyed the game. Let's go through some of the attacking metrics. So for the Crusaders, they had 25 defenders beaten, 4 clean breaks, and 5 offloads. For the Blues, they had 21 defenders beaten, 7 clean breaks, and 5 offloads. So really not a lot in that. Offloads are equal. A couple more clean breaks to the Blues, and a couple more defenders beaten to the Crusaders. And I must say, Richie Mwanga, he was a beast in terms of defenders beaten. I believe he had something like 8 or 9 defenders beaten for the night. So well done as a 10. That's pretty good work. Certainly taking it to the line and being quite effective. But yeah, both teams pretty equal in terms of doing positive, doing useful, good things with the ball. Crusaders ran for about 50 more meters than the Blues over the 80 minutes. Turnovers conceded, definitely a stat that was quite high for the game. 14 for the Crusaders and 11 for the Blues, which led to a little bit of a stop-start affair. It's pretty hard for teams to put too many phases together consistently. And then obviously, you put that with, respective teams winning turnovers as well, and, things start to get, pretty disruptive. And I guess that was always going to be the case though as well, just like where the Blues were strong or looking very strong was the back row v the Crusaders. So you always kind of thought that the Blues were going to be out to spoil ball at the ruck, make things pretty dirty, nasty, and then the Crusaders are just trying to, unleash that back line. So yeah, definitely different styles or, different strengths between the two teams. If we do go on to defence, have a look. Crusaders only made 100 tackles. So again, it was sort of second week in a row where the Crusaders were playing with a lot of ball. They were very prepared to play defence against the Chiefs a couple of weeks back, and they put in a huge defensive shift. But the last week against the Highlanders, they really dominated or made the Highlanders tackle a lot. Although by the end they dominated too. And then this week as well against the Blues, it's 100 tackles to the Crusaders, 146 to the Blues. So that's a pretty significant difference. 45, 50 extra tackles over 80 minutes for the Blues. And then if you have a look at missed tackles, 21 for the Crusaders, 25 for the Blues. Turnovers won. This was quite key. So the Crusaders won 5 turnovers. The Blues only won 1 turnover. So that's pretty interesting. The Blues were pretty good with ball in hand and not conceding turnovers, but they weren't very good at forcing the issue and actually winning turnovers. Whereas, the Crusaders let themselves down with, you would say, more unforced errors, but they were able to sort of claw back some of that unforced error rate by winning 5 turnovers to 1. So there you go. Yeah, the ruck was pretty willing and fairly even in the scheme of things. I really thought the Blues might be able to perform a bit better there, and I think that might be a reason why they're on the losing side. One of the key reasons. If we go through and get down to the set plays and discipline, so basically line-outs, scrums, and then what's going on at the penalty with the penalty counts and cards. So let's have a look at this. So for the Crusaders, they 14 line-outs won and 3 lost. So 82% success there at line-out time. For the Blues, 8 line-outs won and 1 lost. So 88% success for the Blues. So both teams doing very well. 80% plus at line-out time. Crusaders lost 3 of 17 line-outs. The Blues only lost 1, but they only actually threw in 9 times. So considerable. What's that? A +8 difference to the Crusaders in terms of like who's throwing in at the line-out. It's pretty significant. If you have a look at scrums, what did you have there? A little bit of a shift around or a turnaround there. So Crusaders had 4 scrums and they lost none. Although they did get into some issues with scrum penalties. I guess they were more sort of like defensive scrum penalties or rather than offensive scrum penalties. Or I guess you would say they were not on their feed, but they were penalised a couple of times at scrum, and in fact that led to the second try to Rico Ioane. That was essentially of a sort of an aggressive scrum penalty, or like awarding the team putting in, which was the Blues 5 out. So yeah, but in terms of on their feed, they put in 4 times and they won 4 times. Blues put in 7 times and they actually lost a scrum in there as well. But on the whole, you'd have to say set piece was pretty good from both teams. 17 lineouts for 3 losses, Crusaders, and then 4 scrums, and nothing going on there at scrum time in terms of lost scrums. So pretty reasonable from Crusaders. And then the Blues, they had more scrummaging, and they did lose 1, but they just were kind of out of it at line-out time, only having 9 scrums total in the match. Quite interesting. Maybe a couple too little or a couple too less, right? If we have a look at discipline, that's quite interesting. I felt like the penalty count was perhaps a little bit on the high side, but when you look at the actual official stats, Crusaders conceded 6 penalties, the Blues conceded 12 penalties. So that's a terrible stat to be on the wrong side of. You can't be +6 away against the Crusaders. That's just giving them a little bit too much free ball, to get into your half and play a territorial game. So yeah, +6 to the Blues there in terms of penalties conceded on the wrong side of that penalty count. No cards, which was good. So yeah, 18 penalties in total. I think around 15 is a good game. So didn't penalise too much. Although it did feel like sometimes the referee was a little bit too technical around the line out and the scrum perhaps, but I guess there was more short arm penalties or free kicks awarded than I remembered, not so much the long arm. So let's have a look at action areas. So for this, the Crusaders had 60% to 40% possession overall, which seems about right. We'll start with the Crusaders. So the Crusaders played 21.8% of the game in the Blues 22 with ball in hand. So that's very impressive. And they only played, 4.4% of the game was played in their 22. So Blues and Crusaders in the Crusaders 22. Less than 5% of the game was played there. Whereas the Crusaders were playing with 21.8% of the game with ball in hand in the Blues 22. So yeah, that's pretty interesting stuff there. It does suggest territorial dominance, perhaps a better kicking game from the Crusaders. Beauden Barrett at fullback, he was a little bit hot and cold, it must be said. His running game really just didn't get going at all. Like I said, both himself, Barrett, and Havili, they both made a high number of turnovers conceded, just when the wet conditions going up for catching balls, etc. It was a bit stop-start, it was a bit messy like that. And then his kicking game was mostly pretty good in terms of territorial open play kicking. But yeah, he did make a few mistakes there, that's for sure. I do remember at least once that he put the ball out on the full in a kick return. So yeah, but I mean, the stats certainly suggest that a huge amount of this game was played in Blues country, which does sound familiar, or that does seem correct. If I just have a quick squiz through there, if we look at territory, which doesn't actually divide it into territory for me, but it's more like 4/4 of the field. But yeah, or like I said, 21.8% Crusaders ball in hands in the Blues 22. Maybe I'll just switch it back around and let's have a look at the Blues. So the Blues played 1.5% of the game. That's in the Crusaders 22, Blues with ball in hand. 1.5% of the game. Wow, that's extremely low. And then they had to play 33.8, was that 34.8% of the game was Crusaders and Blues playing in the Blues 22. So yeah, that's the sort of stats to me that sort of says like you shouldn't be winning that game, and they didn't. Although to be fair, they hung in pretty tough. They certainly showed some really good signs in that first 20 minutes. I'm sort of surprised that they only had 1.5% over the entire game. I mean, that 1.5% must have really come in the first basically 20 minutes of the game, and I guess the Rieko Ioane's score off of the 5-metre scrum and then tap and go penalty. I mean, they basically mustn't have gotten into the Crusaders 22 for the rest of the game. But yeah, it did, I guess, feel like that a little bit, but I'm a little bit surprised that only 1.5% of that game was Blues ball in hand in the Crusaders 22. If I just quickly go back to sort of that territorial stat, I just want to see if I add it all up, just roughly. So if I do basically from from Blues goal line to the halfway, what do I come up with? So I just told you it was sort of like 34 and change. It was roughly 34% of the game was played in the Blues 22, and then you could add what do you got there? 22 and 17, so 29, 39. You could pretty much add another 40% of the game was played between the Blues 22 and halfway. So you're looking at well over 70% of the game was played in the Blues half, and against the Crusaders. I'm not sure if there's too many teams in the world that can really hold out for 80 minutes with that much pressure, along with that much game being played, especially with the Crusaders having 60% to 40% possession on top of maybe 70% plus territory. The Blues actually probably did pretty well. One to be ahead by 6, but then maybe to only lose by 11 as well. Crusaders would probably punish a number of teams around the world, and certainly in Super Rugby by a lot more than that. But yeah, well done there to both teams. It was pretty good. I'm at 33 minutes here. I'm sort of rambling along a little bit too much. Apologies. Let's have a look at some player stats. So just going to have a quick scroll through. Richie Mwanga, like I said, he ran for 62 metres, 8 defenders beaten, 1 clean break, 1 offload, 1 try assist, and 16 points for the game from the boot. Pretty awesome game, you have to say. Certainly dominated at 10. Who else? I think he had the top run meters for the Crusaders as well. And then Mark Talia, he got a try in that first 20 minutes. He ran for 62 metres, 3 defenders beaten, 2 clean breaks. Sort of went off the boil a little bit, you'd have to say, after sort of 20-25 minutes. Started strong. Well, the Blues in general started strong, right? And he looked good on the end of that. But then it became a lot scrappier, a lot harder for him to kind of get involved in the game. Yeah, pretty interesting. If you just have a look at a couple of the big names there, players you would have thought would maybe go pretty big for run meters. Bowden Barrett, 25 run meters for the game. Rieko Ioane, 6 run meters for the game. To be fair, he did score a try, so well done there. But only 6 run meters from centre, and Caleb Clark, 1 run meter for the game. So you're looking at 32 run meters out of those 3. Like, wow, that's pretty shocking. And hence the reason why the Blues basically ran for 200 meters total, right? It's pretty low. Yeah, what else we got there? So yeah, pretty much it was the Moanga Maktalia show in terms of like who was running for what. George Bridge was pretty reasonable as well. I think you've got to give him a shout out. I mean, Moanga put him into space down the side to score their first try, which Mitchell Drummond ended up being the recipient. But really, that was a bit of magic from Richie Moanga to thread the needle through 2 or 3 different defenders, get it out wide to Bridge. Bridge was good enough to beat the cover and then suck in at least 2, maybe even 3 players and throw a great left to right pass back into Mitchell Drummond, just running a pure clean halfback line. So that really was a great try, and George Bridge certainly credited with the try assist there. So I mean his stats were 49 run meters, 3 defenders beat him, 1 clean break, and 1 try assist. So yeah, I mean, well done, George Bridge. To me, George Bridge is rapidly becoming another one of those sort of like Ben Smith style, back 3 guys for like in New Zealand rugby. Just incredibly dependable. He's going to make kind of like the right decision. He's always kind of going to be in the right place, and he's just going to do core roles just really, really well. And I think on a greasy night like that, he certainly outperformed the likes of a Caleb Clark or even a Mark Talia, and even Bo Barrett. But yeah, others that were pretty quiet there, David Harvili, 19 run meters, 3 turnovers conceded. Like I said before, it was quite a high error rate at the back. Sever Rees only ran for 6 meters as well. So a lot of people were contained in that match. But yeah, there you go. So those are run meters. If we have a look at the tackling stats, I don't think there'd be too much there for the Crusaders. I think they only made 100 from memory. Although maybe some of their back row was fairly willing. I'm kind of looking for 15 plus tackles. I'm not really seeing anything there. I guess Tom Christie for the Crusaders, he made 12 tackles, missed no tackles, and got a turnover. So that's pretty reasonable work from the Crusaders 7. If we have a look at the Blues, I think the tackle count there is led by Kira Ioane. Kira Ioane made 14 tackles, missed 1. Tunga Fasi, Ofa Tunga Fasi made 13 tackles there at prop for the Blues as well. So, and Alex Hodgman as well, 11. So Blues props were both very busy. The starting props, Tunga Fasi 13 and Hodgman 11. But the tackle count was led by Akira Ioane from 6 from blindside, 14 tackles. So yeah, both sides not really having to do that much defense really. I mean, it was sort of 100 tackles to 150, so not a big tackling match. Yeah, so I'm just going to jet out of that and try and push on to the Hurricanes, see how I go. So that was the Crusaders match, or the Crusaders Blues match. It was decent. It was high quality. But when the rubber met the road, that last sort of 20-25 minutes, Crusaders, they certainly had another gear, if not another 2 gears, and the Blues were not able to match that at all. It must be said, or that's what I think as a neutral, or pretty much a neutral. So yeah, moving on to the Hurricanes game against the Highlanders, Sunday game, 2nd game of the round for the New Zealand teams. 4th game in total, I guess. Hurricanes won at 17-11 at home, so pretty good for the Hurricanes. Obviously, difficult start, having to play, Blues away, a rejuvenated Blues away at Eden Park, round 1. Play the Crusaders at home, round 2. I mean, it's a possibility that you could have won those 2 games and or one of them, but it's also quite likely that you drop them both, which is what happened. And then obviously you've got to take the bye after that as well, so you're kind of 3 rounds into the competition with no points or no wins, and I believe no points as it was. So things are looking pretty rocky. And then obviously Carlos Spencer decided to pull the plug and resign, basically effective immediately rather than at the end of the competition. Things were starting to look pretty pear-shaped in Wellington. But they had that bye week. They came strong up to Hamilton, won in Chiefs country last week, and then came back home and won at home against the Highlanders. And I think you'll find if we go through the stats over the next 10 minutes or so, that it probably should have been even more convincing than it was on the scorecard or the scoreboard. So my thinking is, getting that win over the Chiefs, which is what they needed to do, to get into the competition, was sort of almost like a qualifier, if you will. And then this game here for the Hurricanes at home against the Highlanders is almost like a quarter-final. And they've kind of won a quarter-final, and now next week, which will be round 6, they get to stay at home and play the Blues. And I kind of feel like that's going to be like a semi-final for them, and if they can beat the Blues, well, they're pretty much going to lock up, they're going to be locked up with the Blues in terms of 3 wins, 2 losses for the respective teams. They'll both be on about 12, 13 points. Crusaders having the bye, they'll be able to chase up there, or make up points, and then it would be sort of round 7 down in Christchurch would be like the Hurricanes final, where they're going to have to go, and beat the Crusaders in Christchurch in 2 weeks' time. So that's sort of the way that I'm thinking. Just with the Hurricanes starting with 2 losses and a bye, it's kind of like, okay, well, that away game against the Chiefs is a qualifier. Do you actually want to be in this tournament or not? You do. Okay, cool. You won that game. Back home against the Highlanders, this is a quarter-final. You've got to beat the Highlanders at home. Okay, yep, we've done that. Now we're up to a semi-final coming into round 6 against the Blues. It's like, are you really number 3 or are you really number 2? And if they can beat the Blues, then they get the opportunity to basically say, hey, we're number 2. And then that number 2 contender is going to be able to basically go to Christchurch for round 7, just give it everything they've got, and, have a shot at the contender, or be a contender and have a shot at the champion, right? So that's sort of the way I'm thinking of it. So basically, so far the Hurricanes have qualified for the tournament, if you will, by beating the Chiefs, keep themselves in it, and then they've won a quarter-final against the Highlanders. The next 2 weeks, can the Hurricanes essentially win a semi-final against the Blues and then win a final against the Crusaders in Christchurch? I don't know. I don't really think so, but at the same time, I'm not against it. I'm not ruling it out. So yeah, if you have a look at the game, have a look at some of the team stats. Hurricanes won it 3 tries to 1. Like I said, probably should really have won that, 3-0, 4-1, 5-2, 5-1, something like that. I think they really should have got a bonus point out of this game. If we have a look at the run meters, Hurricanes ran for 523 meters, the Highlanders for 411. I think quite a number of those Highlanders run meters came in that last sort of 5 to 10 minutes when they were really chasing the game. They were outside the 7-point play, if you will, and the Hurricanes were almost sort of shutting up shop a little bit in the game. They kind of had things, they were kind of controlling things, if you will. They were sort of up by 9, and they got a bit negative, just went to defense, and the Highlanders got quite a lot of run meters in that last 10 minutes. To get themselves up to 411 for the game. But yeah, I think really the difference between the two teams in terms of run meters was probably actually a lot more than that for most of the game. So 520 odd for the Hurricanes, 410 odd for the Highlanders, a plus 110 meter run difference for the Hurricanes. But I think for most of the game it was even more than that. Defenders beaten. So let's have a look at some of the attacking metrics, doing good things with the ball in hand. So the Hurricanes had 31 defenders beaten, 20 clean breaks, and 17 offloads. So yeah, keeping that ball alive. Maybe a few too many instances of that. For the Highlanders, they had 20 defenders beaten, 9 clean breaks, and 6 offloads. So if you have a look at that, those are essentially good pieces of rugby, with the ball in hand. Hurricanes defenders beaten 31 to 20. Clean breaks 20 to 9, and then offloads 17 to 6. So the Hurricanes are doing a lot more with the ball in hand. They ran for more meters, 110 plus more meters, and they were doing a lot more with the ball in hand. Turnovers conceded for both teams was again quite high. It was pretty windy, and then a massive sort of storm basically kind of rolled into Wellington at the end of the game, which didn't help things too much. But yeah, the Hurricanes conceded 13 turnovers, the Highlanders 11. Kind of surprised that there wasn't actually more of a difference there. I felt like the handling of the Hurricanes, certainly in that last sort of 20 minutes, was pretty dire. But that's what it is. Well, that's what it is officially. If we have a look at the tackling stats, this is pretty huge. So the Hurricanes made 88 tackles, which is extremely minimal over an 80-minute game. And the Highlanders made 195. So I'll say that again, 88 tackles for the Hurricanes, 195 for the Highlanders. So that differential is what? I mean, it's 110 plus. It's like 115, plus 115 tackles to the Highlanders. You really should be beating that team by more than 2 tries. Do you know what I mean? That should be more than 3 tries to 1. That should be 4 tries to 1, 5 tries to 1, 5 tries to none, something like that. Like, teams having to go that deep, as the Highlanders had to make that many tackles, that many extra tackles. You should be capitalising on that. Unbelievably though for the Hurricanes, they made 88 tackles, but they missed 20. So it's pretty terrible in terms of missed tackles there. Highlanders 195 tackles and they missed 31. So missed tackle count was actually fairly low for the Highlanders. I mean, it's kind of high, but for making 195 tackles, fairly low. And then the Highlanders really bossed the turnover as well. Hurricanes won 4 turnovers, and the Highlanders won 8. So they were pretty disruptive there, which you'd have to say they really needed to be. When you look at all the good things that the Hurricanes were doing with the ball in hand, how many extra run meters they had, you're really needing to dominate and win that turnover. Turnovers won basically at broken play. Which the Highlanders did. Sorry, it's very hard for me. Hurricanes, Highlanders, they kind of roll off the tongue. It's kind of hard to differentiate them sometimes. But so I mean, definitely the attacking stats and defensive stats, if you will, are massively favouring the Hurricanes there. But again, like we said, it's only a 6-point win. If we have a look at the breakdown. No, we don't want to do that. We want to look at set plays and discipline. So we want to look at lineouts, scrums, and penalties. So for the Hurricanes, they threw into a lineout. They had 8 lineouts, or they won 8 lineouts, and they lost none. So had 8 lineouts, won 8 lineouts. Very good, well done, Hurricanes. For the Highlanders, it was a little bit more of a mixed bag. Actually, it was a bit of a disaster. They won 9 lineouts, but they lost 5. So, the Hurricanes really did go to work there, and I believe Scott Scrafton, hat tip there. He was very good this week. Played big minutes, might have played the full 80 actually, and he was very good at line-out time. If we have a look at scrums, Hurricanes had 6 scrums, and they won 6 scrums. Highlanders had 4, and they lost 1. So, I mean, the Hurricanes were flawless at set piece, only threw in 8 times, not too much, but they won all 8. Had 6 scrum feeds and won 6 scrums, and then they were really disruptive at line-out time for the Highlanders, who had 14 line-outs but only won 9, lost 5, and the Hurricanes even won 1 of the 4 scrums, like Highlanders scrums. So again, you put those attacking metrics, those really positive, really good, favourable attacking metrics together. You put the defensive metrics together, and you put the set piece metrics together, and you have to say, Hurricanes just dominated this game, by all, everywhere. But it was still with, Highlanders were still there or thereabouts with 2 minutes to go when they took that penalty. They had a little bit of a Hail Mary 1 minute to try and steal the game. But discipline. I think this has to be something that the Hurricanes are looking at today or tomorrow when they're debriefing. So the Hurricanes conceded 15 penalties. The Highlanders conceded 8. So plus 7 penalties to the Hurricanes. That's a bad stat. For a game, for both teams in a game, you're kind of thinking, a good game, a well refereed game, a good free flowing game has about 15 penalties in it. Well, the Hurricanes by themselves conceded 15 penalties. So you're definitely want to address that and severely drop that over the next 2 weeks for sure. If you're giving the Blues, conceding 15 penalties to the Blues, it's going to be a tough day. And if you concede 15 penalties to the Crusaders in Christchurch, it's going to be more than a tough day. No red cards, no yellow cards this week, which was great. Let's have a look at some of those action areas. So the possession was 63% to the Hurricanes, 63-37 to the Hurricanes in terms of overall possession. So even more possession dominance for the Hurricanes than the Crusaders Blues. Hurricanes, they played 30.9% of the game, ball in hand, in the Highlanders 22. So I don't know what else to say about that, right? I mean, that's just a ridiculous stat. More than 30% of the game you're playing with the ball in hand in your opposition's 22. I think you should be scoring more than 3 tries, sorry. And then what did they do in their 22? So Hurricanes and Highlanders played 6.8% of the game total in the Hurricanes 22. So again, not having to do much on defense, not really being in your 22 almost at all in the game, well under the 10% that you want to be, and way more over the 10% than you want to be at your opposition's 22. I think you should be destroying that game. You should be winning that game by plenty. In reverse, the Highlanders, they spent 4.5% of the game ball in hand in the Hurricanes 22. So it's probably about half. It's about halfway to 10%. Which is where I like teams to be, or where I think teams should be. And then they spent 39.5% of the game in their own 22. That's Hurricanes ball in hand and themselves ball in hand. And that's 39.5% of the game in their 22, and 30.9% of that 39% was Hurricanes with ball in hand in their 22. So geez, hat tip to the Highlanders for not getting blown away there, but pretty amazing to me. There's just so many favourable stats there. The only things that I can really say are Hurricanes conceded a couple more turnovers than the Highlanders. I thought it would actually be a bigger gap between the two teams, sort of unforced errors, if you will. The Highlanders did win at the breakdown in terms of turnovers won. They did win that, they did boss that, but not by a huge margin, or not by enough to offset some of these other stats. And then obviously the penalty count was massive, heavily favouring the Highlanders. But still, when you have a look at the possession the Hurricanes had, the territory they had, the time in the opposition 22 they had, having to make basically no tackles for the game. I mean, almost like a half game of tackling. All the things they were doing that were well-constructed pieces of rugby, from the running game, 500 plus run meters, many defenders beaten, many clean breaks, many offloads, blah, blah, blah. It's like, I have no idea how that game, and then the set piece as well, they won all their lineouts, they won all their scrums, and they spoiled massively at lineout time on Highlanders ball. It's pretty amazing that just looking at the stats, that the Highlanders kept in that game so close or so well. Let's have a quick look through. I'm getting a bit late here, a little bit long, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, I'm kind of enjoying myself. I enjoyed both of those games on the weekend. I even enjoyed the Australian games. It was a good weekend of rugby. So yeah, let's have a look at the Hurricanes and have a look at some of the attack stats there. Maybe have a quick squiz through the Highlanders as well. Nani Laumape, he loves the Highlanders. Got a try denied. I think probably fair enough. There was a little bit of obstruction going on there. Got a try denied. He ran for 88 metres, 9 defenders beaten, 4 clean breaks, and 1 offload. He was pretty awesome. And obviously, had he been given that try, probably would have run for 100 metres, scored a try, blah, blah, blah. Would have been a really good day at the office. So well done, Nani Laumape, keeping himself there or thereabouts in terms of the All Black compensation, which is good. The back three was good, but not outstanding. Ben Lamb, Van Veek ran for sort of 45, 50 metres. Geordie Barrett was pretty contained, only 22 metres. Got the try assist, and Van Veek scored off that try assist. Perenara ran for 33 metres and got a try. But pretty much everybody had a bit of a crack in the Hurricanes back line, and even the back row. It was everybody had a crack. Basically, not a huge amount of running from anyone else. I guess shout out to Asafa Almoa, 63 run meters. He had 3 defenders beaten and 1 clean break and 2 offloads. So he's definitely got a good mentor in Dane Coles, and he's shown that he's a ball player as well. So hat tip Asafa Almoa. If you have a look at the Highlanders, so the run meters sort of evened up in that last 10 meters. They're still sub 100. It's like 110 metres down on the Hurricanes overall, but I think it was probably more like 150, even 200 metres, maybe at the 60-minute mark. Jonah Nariki, he ran for 66 metres, didn't beat too many defenders, 1 defender beat and 3 clean breaks. Not too bad, but maybe not enough again. I was sort of thinking that he would have to have a really big game, just because the likes of Michael Collins and Scott Gregory are not that creative, and even the midfield pairing for the Highlanders is pretty rock solid, but not very dependable, but not exciting, if you will, or dynamic. So yeah, I was sort of thinking Nariki might have to go really big and 100 plus for the day, and he didn't. Mitch Hunt, 76 run meters from 10. It's pretty nice work. 6 defenders beaten, 2 clean breaks. Yeah, so Mitch Hunt and Richie Mwanga both shown that running first fives can be really, really dangerous. Shannon Frizzell ran for 51 meters from 6. But yeah, not too much else there going on for the Highlanders. In terms of tackles, well, I mean, there wasn't a lot going on for the Hurricanes. They only made, like I said, 88 in total. So I'm just not going to talk about that. There's got to be some tackling from the Highlanders, though. They nearly made 200 tackles. So, Sio Tompkinson made 16. He led the backs. 16 tackles and 3 missed tackles. That's a pretty huge body of work for a second five. Maybe a couple too many missed tackles there, like in the midfield. You got Rob Thompson, 13 tackles, 4 missed tackles. Sio Tompkinson, 16 tackles, 3 missed tackles. So quite a few there, like 7 missed tackles from the midfield. But, put in pretty big defensive shifts. And Jack Whitten, well, he got subbed fairly early in that game, but he still made 17 tackles, missed no tackles, and won a turnover. So, hats tip, pretty good work there from Jack Whitten. Getting that start as a lock. Siati Tokalahi, 15 tackles. Aiden Johnston, 15 tackles. So, both Highlanders starting props were very busy. 15 tackles apiece. But I mean, at the end of the day, not that many turnovers. I mean, Aaron Smith actually got in there for 3 turnovers. That's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive work by Aaron Smith. But yeah, it's just not enough. I'm pretty amazed. I think the Highlanders will be I think if they kind of go through all those stats and have a look at themselves, they'll be pretty happy actually to get out of Wellington there with a bonus point, to get a losing bonus point. So there's a lot of stats there just saying that game should not have been close. That should have been a pretty big win to the Hurricanes, a bonus point win basically to the Hurricanes. Instead, the Highlanders get the losing bonus point, Hurricanes get denied the try bonus. But yeah, Hurricanes did at least enough. Like we've said before, winning away in Chiefs country last week, well done. And then doing what you need to do, which is winning home games, beating the Highlanders at home this week, giving yourself that opportunity to win 3 in a row and beat the Blues next week, again, second home game in a row. So, well done Hurricanes, and, best of luck to the Highlanders as well. Believe they will be taking on the Chiefs, and they will be away for the second week in a row. They'll be taking on the Chiefs in Hamilton. So yeah, gonna leave it at that. 57 minutes, almost an hour. Apologise, a little bit of a rambling one there, but thank you very much. All I can say is, please subscribe to my YouTube channel here. That'd be great. And please look me up on Facebook at the Rugby Gods podcast or the Rugby Gods podcast. You should be able to find a Facebook page there, and give me a like or follow, or give me a subscribe here on YouTube. Those would be great things. Obviously, send me a private message or a public comment. That's all good as well. If it's about rugby, I'll definitely get back to you and enjoy some back and forth, some chit chat, some good rugby banter. So yeah, I'm gonna sign it all off there. Hope you're well. Hope things are good. Hope you enjoyed the round 5 games from Super Rugby Aotearoa, round 2 games in Australia, and halfway through the competition. I think somewhere along the line this week I will probably do a bit more of a deep dive review of the first rounds 1 to 5, basically the first half of the competition. I think I made some predictions 5 or 6 weeks ago as to where I thought all the New Zealand teams would be after 5 rounds, and let's see how right I was about all that. But yeah, thanks a lot. I'm going to sign out there. Stay safe. Hope you're enjoying life. Ka kite noa. I'll see you again. Bye bye.